My Love of Life Energy is a podcast created by Anna Scott. Anna knows that every human being sees life uniquely. In this podcast, she will talk to people and learn from them. These conversations are to shine the brilliance of each human being she speaks to. Join her. After each exploration, you will expand on your insights and see truth and beauty.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to my podcast, My Love of Life Energy. And this is another interview in my series from the writers of The Story of the Muses. And today I have really the great honor of talking with Jennie Linthorst. And it's really a privilege, Jennie. Welcome so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So Jennie is one of those writers, when you hear her work, Jules Swale said it best, you could listen to it all day long. It reminds me of Ann Patchett or something like that, somebody who writes so, I don't know, it's like the beauty, the simple beauty and mystery of life. And I'm wondering, you've been writing for a long time, is that true?
I have, yes. I've been really studying the craft of writing for about 20 years now, and just started publishing, I guess back in like 2010 was when I first started publishing, and my first book was published in 2011 and my second book around 2013. And I'm trying really hard to compile another book of poetry. I have so much from these years, and hoping that to get going on that more in the fall.
What do you love about writing?
Writing has always been my way of capturing the moments in my life. And that's what I love about poetry, because poetry to me are snapshots. And they're snapshots of my life and a way for me to document. And what I find is that the best poems are looking at our ordinary human moments, but finding the extraordinary in it. And to me, that's what I try to do and capture in my poems, and what I try to do with my poetry therapy clients, which is my job, and I have a practice in that. And that's what makes it healing. So for me, that's the healing part of it, is I think I write more to work out what is extraordinary about my moments, and to work through pain and light and all of it on the page. And the container of the poem has been the right fit for me.
Oh my God, I love, that's so fascinating, to work through the pain through poetry.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's how I fell into the career of poetry therapy, was that first and foremost, I knew that poetry, especially reading other people's poems, it's where you find yourself. You find yourself less alone. You can find lines that absolutely speak to your soul. And it's a way for you to use that as inspiration for your own writing, whether you're even just journaling, which is how I've always written before I started the craft of poetry. My grandmother was a poet. That's how I think I fell into the love of poetry, and kind of fell into this career as well. And I used her book that was very autobiographical, and she didn't start writing until her 60s. And her collected poems were all about being a woman and aging. And I stumbled into reading that book with a group of seniors at a retirement home in between jobs, and instinctively had the residents write in response to lines in her poem, and then to write about their lives. And the director was like, "You need to be doing this for a living." And I pivoted and created a whole course, and then ultimately went on to get certified and in poetry therapy and start my own practice. But she really gave me the inspiration. But I had journaled my whole life. I mean, I remember as a teenager, song lyrics were so important to me, and I consider that to be poetry. And I would just obsess over lyrics and write from them. And in a sense, that's the exact process of poetry therapy, is finding yourself in a poem and then writing in response, and then looking at that for the therapeutic value.
Wow. Wow. What are your favorite poems? I'm just curious.
Oh gosh, there's so many.
What's
one that's standing out to me right now that I keep using over and over with clients is Stanley Kuntz's The Layers. It's mind-blowing. I love David White, a lot of Mary Oliver. I mean, obviously most people know Wild Geese. That's one of my favorites. I'm always leaning into old favorite poems that, depending on what I'm going through in my life right now, I can read a poem and it means something to me each time. But it gives me a path. Certain lines will speak to me and help me map my way out of whatever it is that I'm struggling with.
Oh my God. So it's like the poem gives you the road out of your struggles.
Yes. And it gives you the way in to find that in your own voice. And that's what I do with my clients is, I'll put an accessible poem in front of you and say, like, what lines, where are you in this? And depending on what lines they bring up, I listen intently and feedback what they're saying and get them almost writing through the discussion. And it's amazing the insights that will come forward just from a line in a poem, and then have them go write and then read it more for therapeutic value. I mean, they will ultimately get product, but we don't, those are different. I teach poetry as well and do editing. But when I have my poetry therapy hat on, that's a different process.
And I just can't, I imagine people, I can see the healing because people feel something, the line that touches them, or the pain or the energy that they haven't been able to be with. And then they're able to transform or find another way of looking at it that transform it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's through their own writing. The poem is just the catalyst. And to me, it's the doorway that is so powerful. I mean, it's one of the under the umbrella of art therapies. It's also called bibliotherapy, journal therapy, but poetry therapy, it's about the poem that you put in front of them and then their own writing in response to it. But to me, no matter what's going on in someone's mind and consciousness, whatever they're struggling with, they will find it no matter what poem I put in front of them, but they'll find a way in through the poem. And I mean, it's amazing. People will start crying immediately sometimes because it's just so powerful how quickly we get to what is needing to be peeled back.
God, it just seems like such a reverence for a place of humanity.
Yeah.
The different forms. So I'm so curious, how did you come across Jules and the method writing?
So I've been studying method writing for about 20 years. This has been the main way that I have studied craft. When I was getting certified in poetry therapy, you have to have all sorts of hours and background knowledge in literature and poetry. And I started to study with my first teacher in method writing, Stella Sue Lee. And I studied with her for about 12 years. And I still work with her. She's my editor, and she started a small press that published my first 2 books. But she, in those first 12 years, we were studying method writing. She studied with Jack Grapes for decades. So she was my initial first teacher, and we went all the way through all the levels like we're doing, through the muses and the poets and all of it. And, then I took a big break where I was publishing a lot and studying in other groups. And I guess it was a friend, a colleague of mine from graduate school, Neha, who's one of the authors in here. Suddenly we were in touch. We both have our master's in spiritual psychology together from USM. And she was saying that she had stumbled upon this teacher, Jules, that was teaching method writing and teaching slightly different than Stella Sue had taught. And I just decided with a friend, Mari, who you know from class, that she wanted to start as a beginner. And I said, I think I want to go back and do it again. And I want to do it from a beginner's mind. And so I just surrendered to the process. And through this, doing it a second time, I'm now really experimenting with my voice on doing longer pieces, doing more personal essay-like prose writing. And in the Muse book, these are the first prose poems that I've published. So much longer sentences, longer pieces. And it's been so inspiring and freeing for me to be a beginner again. And I've taken a big break from submitting and publishing my poems, and really just let myself play with my voice. And I've loved it. It's really gotten me through the pandemic for sure.
And I'm so, like, you're my hero right now. I mean, absolute hero. Does somebody who's that accomplished to go back and start over and learn again? I mean, it's inspiring, really inspiring.
Thank you. I tell, when I work with people with editing and publishing and new writers, I often will tell them, for me, it's important that I am always in some sort of class myself, not teaching, but being the student. And so that's how I keep myself writing. And so I'm always taking courses. And I'm collecting continuing education too for, for my practice and my certification. But it's how I keep writing, and it fuels me. It heals me. It's what I need. So I always recommend to writers, to always be in some sort of group that's keeping you accountable and keeping you writing.
Well, the other thing that I'm seeing is that I would think there's such a freshness. Is that true?
In starting over?
Yeah, and just even by being in it, that you're always fresh. Like you're always looking fresh at something new.
Yes, and it keeps your skills alive. You're constantly working on your techniques and trying to push yourself to a new expansion as a writer. I feel like my next step is the personal essays, that there may be a collection that is both poetry and longer essays. And I look forward to doing Jules, this character class, because who knows, maybe I'll write a short story. I don't see me jumping to a novel. But I think those are the increments that you take as a writer, is that you're challenging yourself to try new forms. So it does keep you fresh, and it keeps you, for those of us that are teaching, when I teach poetry, and I have a poetry curriculum that I taught in the schools for 6 years and is now being piloted. I'm training teachers to now teach it. And, it keeps you fresh as a facilitator when you are constantly taking workshops on your own craft. So I'm always collecting new techniques that I want to put in front of my adult groups or my private clients, or there's such a mix in what I do with poetry. So, it keeps me very fresh.
How do you hold, I'm curious what mastery looks like to you.
Mastery in craft or mastery as a facilitator?
In craft.
Mastery in craft to me looks like always producing first drafts in the freest of forms, and then taking the responsibility to learn how to edit and to know that editing is writing. And, like they say, writing is rewriting. That I have particular steps. And when I work with, new poets and teaching them that, you can't just send something out in a first draft. There are layers of editing that is the craft. You're constantly looking to elevate your language. You're looking at things that are considered abstractions. Like if you were to say, I felt lonely, that is something that needs to be elevated. It's the showing, not the telling. So, first step is going back and marking everything where you're telling instead of showing, and layering in poetry, layering the poetics, right? Where, what metaphor or what images can be used here? How can I bring in my senses? All the techniques that we learned in method writing, definitely for changing the tonality. But, mastery is understanding that there's poems that are getting published. It's about making it sparse, in what is left behind. Every sentence needs to matter. Every word needs to matter. And when you get to that final draft, you have done all of that work. And, you're getting to the heart of what you're saying. You're cutting the fat around it, and you're constantly elevating it. And you're working on your beginnings and your endings, and just there's stages to a piece that I think is what I call mastery. And I'm still working on it. It's so much easier for me to work on another poet's editing and help guide them through that than to do it on my own. But another part of mastery is knowing the right people to have around you that are helping you with your work. Like Stella Sue is still my first editor I put things in front of. And then I have someone else that helps me take a last look and helps me find the right places to submit the literary journals and the magazines. I've done that research on my own, but I've learned that I'm too busy and I need to spend some money and hire somebody else to help me do that piece. So, there's a rhythm of real mastery, and I struggle with it, but I at least know how.
I'm so curious, how has your practice of writing impacted how you live your life?
Oh, I think, I don't know if you know Brene Brown, but I teach with her concepts a lot. And she asks you to come up with your core values. And one of my core values is creativity. And I know that I have to be doing that. I have to be flexing that muscle somehow. It's expanded into other things like cooking and doing mixed media art and bringing in words from my poems onto canvas. But anything like that where I can lose myself, and writing is that. So I think writing, it's helped me show up in my life. It helps me process what it is that I'm struggling with, because I'm constantly putting things on the page, whether they become a poem or not. It keeps me accountable for my process and for my inner work. And I think that ripples into parenting, my marriage, my commitment to my work and my students. If I'm asking this of my students and my clients, I need to take my own medicine,
What strikes me is, Sid Banks, I don't know if you know, I don't know that you're a 3P or not 3 principles.
I'm not. I mean, I know a little bit about it, but Jules, she also has the master's in spiritual psychology. And I want to say that it's in the same realm of consciousness work.
But he has a quote about finding a great teacher. And what you look at the teacher, the person who's teaching you. And what you exemplify to me is a great teacher, because you embody your work, your talk. Like what you say and what you do are such alignment.
Yeah. And I think that's so important if you're going to be a facilitator, of a teacher, a mentor, in some way, that you have to actively be doing that work as well.
That's so interesting. And so how is being a master, is there anything different in being a master facilitator? Because you hold two roles.
I think they're similar in some ways, that, you're constantly taking workshops and staying current and relevant, and with how things are changing. I teach for UCLA Arts and Healing. I teach there. They do a certificate program in social emotional arts, and people come from all over the world to get certified in best practices of each art form. And so I do the poetry training, but they also get trained in movement therapy and visual art therapy and music therapy, and how to go back to the populations that they're working with. And, they're constantly, UCLA Arts and Healing is constantly giving me updates on trainings in diversity, equity and inclusion, and, working with the LGBTQ community, and all of that's part of mastery, and how we communicate and how we stay current with the times, and trauma-informed communication. Like, all of that is so current right now. And so I think mastery as a facilitator is that you're constantly training yourself so that you're communicating in the best possible way.
It seems to me what you're always doing is expanding your consciousness. What more can you see? Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that comes from ultimately me getting into psychology and counseling and spiritual psychology. And it's a bigger thing in my family. I mean, my husband is certified has the master's degree in spiritual psychology, got it before me. And it's just a part of our marriage, how we show up in the world, is that you can't look outward and blame. We are all going to go through phases of our lives, and I believe strongly it's our responsibility to be working our process, whatever that means. But really looking at the choices and the beliefs that I'm holding in my life. And to me, that's expanding my consciousness and doing the work instead of projecting it outward. If you work with marriages, and I'm in a very long marriage, it's so important to be working on ourselves. So it's kind of all of that, pulled together.
Do you experience, this is going to be a really a strange question, but what I feel is that you guys must experience more love in your marriage.
I think so. I mean, that's one of the great things that I love to write about. I mean, if people read my work, so much of it is about marriage, and it's about those ordinary moments that are truly extraordinary. Like I said before, same with parenting. I'm still so very much in love with my husband after 25 years, and we've been through so much together. And I think that when you work that hard and you have two people that believe in taking responsibility like that, there is fruit. There are blossoms that come from that. And we do the work, and we've been through a lot of crises together. And it's beautiful to be this far along and to feel the way that I do about him.
Wow. People would give their right arm to feel the way that you feel.
I feel blessed that I think we made a good choice in finding each other, but I do think that there's a lot of work that takes place in strong marriages.
All right. So what's your practice for writing? What do you do every day?
I wouldn't say it's every day. I'm one of those people who have struggled for 20 years to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write something every day. And of course I try that over and over again. But like I said, my real process is always being in some sort of class. So like with method writing, I am not one of those that writes every day, whatever the exercise is. I take a lot of time to really process what the exercise is and a lot of thinking about it. And until it comes onto the page. And then I will spend probably 4 or 5 hours total, but spaced out over a period of days on one piece and really immersing the exercise. Now, Jules would be like, that's not what I want you to do, you know? But for me, that's what I do. And then it's about typing it up. And that's when I elevate some of the language a little bit and do some internal editing, I would say. I'm a handwriter first and then type it up. And then like I have notebooks that could fill my office, and I write in these big spiral notebooks. And like when we take a break this summer, I plan on going back through all the notebooks, typing up things that has something in it, and then doing the editing, like really switching from writing to editing and pulling the poems out of the pieces or the essays and getting a group together that I can then go to my first editor and we have a session, and then I keep working on them. And then ultimately the game is to then start submitting them so that they can find a home before you put together a collection of a book. But, you know, I handwrite, and it's always really based on what class I'm in. But I also write with my poetry therapy groups. I will say that. So I have 2 groups. I have a day group and an evening group that meets once a month. And there's this, I take them through the poetry therapy process, and we all write for like 20 to 30 minutes in the group and then share. I write with them. So I am doing that process as well. And I always give them an optional homework exercise that I also complete. So there's a lot of product being generated.
For somebody who doesn't have a practice, you have a very, I just was curious. So Jennie, how do people find you? We're coming to the end, which I can't believe, but
Okay.
How do people find and be blessed by what you're going through in life?
So you can find me through my website, and it's LifeSpeaksPoetryTherapy.com, all one word. And that's probably the best way to find me, and you can contact me through there. I do have a Life Speaks Facebook page, but my website has everything, you know, you could want. And you can purchase my books through my website. They're also available on Amazon. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really have just loved this.
You're welcome.